We are excited to have a really wonderful speaker and presenter with us today. Thank you for joining us today for one of PTAC's workshops, Increasing Competitiveness, talking about the Mentor-Protege programs, joint venture, and teaming relationships. In today's program, we've got an exceptional speaker from a law firm that I have been working with off and on since I started with PTAC, and they are strong supporters of PTAC. They educate the PTACers themselves as well as other the clients that we work with. And I'm very honored to have him with us today. Ian Patterson. Ian is are you a partner, Ian, or no?
Not yet. That's
okay.
If you want to put a word in with Matt when he comes on, feel free.
Well, I'll gloat all about everything we're doing here. I'll definitely ask him to take good care of that. Ian, he actually maintains a very diversified federal government contract law practice himself. He represents clients in contract disputes at the agency level, including bid protests before the Government Accountability Office and size protests before the SBA. In addition to bid protest work, he also assists clients with their claims before the Civilian Board of Contract Appeals and the Armed Service Board of Contract Appeals. And he also has a history of representing clients in federal contracting disputes before the United States Court of Federal Claims. He's got extensive experience in the SBA's small business contracting programs and assists clients with admission into the SBA's AA program and providing counsel to small business compliance issues on the SBA's Service Disabled Veteran-Owned Small Business Program, Women-Owned Small Business, and Hub Zone programs. In addition to that, he provides some more general compliance assistance for contractors that are subject to the federal acquisition regulations. We're so honored to have Ian here with us today because his expertise, in my opinion, is invaluable. It's not every day that you have someone from a law firm that is so tightly connected to what we do here in Southeast and Central Washington with PTAC in general, but to all of those small businesses that we work with. And while this is not legal advice, this is not an opening for his services pro bono. This is an opportunity to learn from him, learn from their law firm, make notes, and have some open question and answer session as we get toward the end. We're going to run through the slide deck first. If you've got questions, feel free to pop them into the chat box, or we will open this up to conversation more one-on-one after the slides. So with that, I will turn it over to Ian.
Great. Well, thank you. And I'm delighted to be here as well. It's always fun. I don't know. I actually visited the area a couple of years ago for bridging partnerships, and so it's fun to be back. As an undergrad, I was a chemist, and I always enjoyed the nuclear side of things. So talking with you guys is always kind of fun for me as well. So I'm very glad to be here. I'm excited to be chatting.
Thank you.
And so I guess let's take off. Let's get rolling with what we're talking about here, which is Mentor-Protege, joint venture, and some teaming relationships. So first, as that wonderful introduction said, I'm Ian Patterson. I'm currently an associate attorney here at Schoonover and Moriarty. We do specialize in federal government contract law. That's what I do day in and day out. So teaming, joint venturing, the whole 9 yards. It's what I do. I kind of live and breathe it. I try not to dream it, but occasionally it sneaks in there. So, of course, I have to put the legal disclaimer on the slide. This isn't legal advice. It's not intended to be legal advice. If you have specific questions about something that you're dealing with, that might be something that we'd want to talk about or another attorney might handle. But general specifics, that's what we're here for. So let's kind of talk through some of the generalities here. So, a quick overview of what we're talking about. We're going to break this up into kind of 3 general topics that I think really encompass most of the ways that businesses can work together to collaborate for a job. So first one's going to be the Mentor-Protege program. So we're going to talk about what is that? What's an overview of the program? What's it do? From there, we're going to talk about some of the nitty-gritties. Let's talk about duration, limitations, and eligibility requirements. What do you have to do to actually be able to participate in this thing? And how long is this going to last? What are some of the limitations? Can I have multiple mentors? Can I have multiple proteges? How many can I have? We'll get into those details. And then we're also going to talk about some of the specifics of the mentor-protege agreement. Spoiler alert, the SBA has the ability to, well, not the ability, it's an SBA program. And so the SBA will review mentor-protege agreements, and it will check for compliance and a number of things. We're going to talk about some of those considerations. From there, that kind of leads us into talking about joint ventures. And so again, we're going to talk about what is a joint venture? How does it work? Why is it helpful? Why would you want to be a joint venture as opposed to maybe a prime sub team or something like that? We're also going to talk about some of the drawbacks and pitfalls. You know, what's challenging about joint ventures, and where are maybe they cumbersome or not optimized for specific tasks. And then we'll talk about some of the work share requirements, some of the joint venture agreement requirements, and then finally we'll close out with prime and subcontractor teams. So that'll be things like, you know, what do you usually look for in a teaming agreement? What are some things to consider when you're looking at that type of stuff? And so that's how we'll close out the presentation. But before we get too far, I have to kind of give the quick plug here for GovCon Brief, which is the blog that myself and the other attorneys around here produce. We blog on a lot of different things. I blog on a lot of GAO case decisions that come out. Some of my colleagues blog on upcoming legislative and regulatory issues. There's just a lot of different things there. So if you're looking for more about kind of federal government contract specific items, things that are going on in the world, and maybe a lawyer's perspective on it, definitely feel free to check it out. Okay, Mentor-Protege program. So let's kind of dive into this and talk about what it looks like. So the Mentor-Protege program is really a way for one business to provide developmental assistance to another business. Now, the business that's providing that assistance can be either large or small. It really just depends on where that business is positioned and kind of where they are in their industry and things like that. There's no hard and fast rule that it has to be a large business as a mentor and a small business as a prime. In fact, I've helped a few small businesses that are taking on proteges in the mentorship capacity and have been successful in that. So the size consideration is not really important in terms of eligibility. However, as we'll talk about, it becomes much more relevant with respect to benefits. But for right now, the core idea is that the Mentor-Protege program provides a way to improve the protege entity's ability to compete for federal contracts. It's basically the SBA saying, all right, the federal government contracting sphere can be difficult to break into, and sometimes you need a friend to be able to do that. So how can we develop a program that will allow us to have regulatory authority and oversight over it, but allow two businesses to collaborate to try and get small businesses a leg up? Importantly, it's open to all small businesses now. And for a while, the SBA ran both an Mentor-Protege program and the all small Mentor-Protege program concurrently. They had pretty similar benefits and advantages, and they had pretty similar requirements and considerations. And so it was really largely duplicative. Also, because if you were in the all small Mentor-Protege program, you could still use that for applying for 8A work. So basically the 8A Mentor-Protege program was the first one and sort of the test bed, but it really became redundant. And so the SBA has now just rolled everything into one. There's the Mentor-Protege program, period. And that's open to all of the socioeconomic set-aside designations, so SDVOSB firms, WOSB firms, HubZone, 8A, and then just generic small business. And as I've alluded to, the SBA is the one who's responsible for actually administering this program. They're the ones who oversee it. Application. The way that you get into the Mentor-Protege program is you apply. And in order to do that, you have to develop a Mentor-Protege agreement that's going to go through, what is the relationship, what assistance is going to be provided, kind of go through some of those detail items. And then that needs to be submitted to the SBA for approval. And once those details are reviewed and approved, then you have the Mentor-Protege agreement in place. And that's how the entrance really starts. So duration. This is one of those things that I think becomes pretty important, particularly for businesses that are trying to leverage the Mentor-Protege program as a competitive advantage type of item. The Mentor-Protege relationship lasts for 3 years. So it's a 3-year tour, but you can apply to the SBA to have that extended for an additional 3 years. So quick math, the total duration, if you go for the extension, is a maximum of 6 years worth of participation. So that's to say that a mentor and a protege firm, the two firms, can have a maximum mentor-protege duration of 6 years. Now, while that mentor-protege relationship is in place, during the 30 days prior to every anniversary, the protege is going to have to submit a report to the SBA. That report's going to include some details about how the relationship is operating. This is going to include technical and management assistance, loans or investments that are made by the mentor, subcontracts that have been entered into between the mentor and protege, and that doesn't really matter whether they're going protege to mentor or mentor to protege. Federal contracts that have been awarded awarded to the pair through a joint venture, and then some narrative describing what assistance has been provided and kind of monitoring the services that are being provided under this. The reason why the SBA wants this is that the SBA wants to make sure that the mentor is upholding their side of the bargain and that the protege is receiving the assistance that they're supposed to under that SBA-approved mentor-protege agreement. If they are not, the SBA has the ability to terminate the mentor-protege agreement, and then it actually can also pursue causes of action against the mentor if there's a pretty egregious or clear failure of the mentor to actually uphold the terms of the mentor-protege agreement. I caution this because I've been working with this for a while, and I have seen a number of times where the mentor-protege agreement is really just seen as a perfunctory tool to get to being able to form a joint venture and then go bidding on things. And while that certainly is an advantage and an advantage that we're going to talk about, the mentor-protege agreement can really do so much more. And particularly for the small business protege, it's an opportunity to receive a lot of assistance and hands-on learning experience. And so if the protege goes in with that thought process of saying, I need to get something out of this, I really do want to learn more about how to be an effective business, they can gain a lot more out of the mentor-protege program. And so these review items during that 30-day anniversary are designed to give the SBA metrics to decide, do we need to terminate this agreement or should it continue? All right. So now let's talk about some of the limitations. You know, it's a government program, so you know there's got to be some limit to it. One of the big ones is the number of mentors that a protege can have. The general rule is that a protege can have one mentor at a time. There are instances where that can change, however. A protege can have a second simultaneous mentor, provided that that second mentor doesn't conflict with the assistance being provided by the first. For example, this could be where the second mentor is, under a second NAICS code, or the protege wants experience that the first can't provide. Those are sort of the examples of where it might be appropriate to have two mentors. What I have found is that if a small business is interested in having two mentors, usually that means that they've grown to a point where they're larger in the small business pool anyway. They may still qualify as small businesses, but they're really starting to push up against the upper limits of what that size standard might be for their industry. And so they've got a little bit more diversification where they can bring on a second mentor and not have an overlap of services, basically, an overlap of mentor-protege services. This bolded point is one of the most important ones to me, and it's a protege can only have two mentors during its lifetime. This was something that the SBA always said was the rule, and yet had really never published it until recently. Now it's out in the open and everybody knows it. But the fact is that the SBA is only going to allow a company to be a protege twice during its lifetime, and it's going to have to be different mentors. You can't just go back to the same one and do it again. So if we go back to the duration slide and think about the practical implication of this, what it means is if you want to maximize the mentor-protege program, you can have 2 mentors total, and those 2 mentors can have a total timeline. If you don't have them duplicating services, you can have a total time in the program of 12 years. That's what you're looking at. If you double up with mentors, you can look at basically 12 years worth of mentor-protege participation. Now, that's the protege's limitation. When we flip to the mentor side, it's a little bit different. So mentors, again, usually will have 1 protege at a time. This is something where, the SBA is presuming, look, we want you to be investing the time and resources necessary in the business that you are serving as the mentor to, and we don't want you to be trying to stretch those resources between multiple proteges. So usually it's 1 protege at a time. However, large businesses, particularly those that are pretty diversified, they've got a lot of different business entities. I'm thinking, like the Raytheons, people of that size. They've got different divisions and things where they can support multiple mentor-protege relationships without really anyone stepping on each other's toes. So the max that a mentor can have is 3 proteges at a time. In order to do that, the business is going to have to show that the additional relationships aren't going to prejudice one another. So you're not going to have situations where 2 of your proteges are bidding against one another on the same contract, things like that. And then there's no lifetime max for mentors. So you can only be a protege twice, but if you want to mentor, however many times you want to do it, totally cool. And then a firm can be a protege and a mentor at the same time. Now, usually this is going to require that the NAICS codes don't conflict, and there's not a situation where you've kind of just got this sort of amalgam of where everyone's providing the same services. But if there's discrete items where the protege is receiving services for one kind of group or assistance under one set of circumstances, and then the mentor to that first relationship actually is then serving as a protege for other items with a different mentor, that is acceptable. So you can kind of have these daisy chains of mentor-protege agreements in place. So eligibility. And this is really where we start getting into some of the nuts and bolts of this program, and getting into the things that really kind of matter to nail down. For proteges, they need to be organized for profit. Nonprofits are not going to be eligible to be proteges. They need to qualify as small in their primary NAICS code, or if they're trying to develop a secondary NAICS code and that's where the assistance is going to be provided, they need to identify that secondary code and explain how it's going to be seeking to develop those additional capabilities. Importantly, that second code is going to have some type of pre-existing capability. It can't be something where you go, oh shoot, we've outgrown the size standard for our primary NAICS, but we could still be small under some other ones. So let's get involved in shipbuilding, even though everything that we've done so far is IT services. It just doesn't really work like that. You need to have a pre-existing kind of secondary business line lined up before you try and use a secondary NAICS to get into the mentor-protege program. And then additionally, affiliation rules apply. Now, affiliation is a very broad topic. It's something that I could probably do a very long presentation on just by itself. Suffice it to say here that affiliation is a situation where 2 or more businesses are deemed to be really operating as one. They've got business relationships in place where really there's no distinction between the 2 functionally, and so the SBA will aggregate the size of those 2 businesses together for determining small business eligibility under the NAICS code standards. in order to be eligible, you need to be aware of how those affiliations might arise, because you need to be small even with the affiliations. So the take home here is that when it comes to qualifying as small, it may not just be your business that you need to be considering. It may need to be other businesses that have common ownership, common management. Maybe they're newly organized and spun off. I mean, there's a number of ways that we talk about, but affiliation could be a challenge. And it's just something to kind of have on the back of your mind. But the key point at the end here is that there's no required socioeconomic designation. As I mentioned, the SBA had operated the Mentor-Protege program as an 8A exclusive for a while. That's no longer the case. They have now transitioned into having the all small Mentor-Protege program, and the all small program ran concurrently and now has just become the Mentor-Protege program. So it's come one, come all, small business, 8A, SDVOSB, WOSB, Hub Zone. Everybody's welcome to participate through this process. Now, if we flip over to the mentor side, there's some similarities here. Again, the mentors need to be organized for profit. And again, this makes sense. You know, what the SBA is saying is we want proteges who are organized for profit to be learning skills, techniques, things like that from other mentors who are organized for profit. That's what we want. That's where we want the information exchange to be happening from. The mentors also need to demonstrate that they can provide the assistance set forth in the Mentor-Protege agreement. Again, this makes sense. What the SBA is saying is you have to be able to deliver the goods. If you're saying that you're going to provide assistance with business development and client development or back of house or any of these things, you need to actually be able to follow through on that. Mentors also need to possess good character. And this is one that can get a little squishy, but usually it means we're not looking at financial crimes of dishonesty, things like that. You know, if a business has been indicted for, say, fraud or something like that, Mentor-Protege program may not be for you. Can't be debarred or suspended. That kind of keeps us in line with the idea of like, look, there has to be at least a track record of ethical business practices to serve as a mentor. And then they need to be able to impart knowledge through experience or general business operations. There has to be a way that the mentor can take what it has learned and actually siphon that off to the protege and provide that assistance. So what are some of the advantages? You know, we've been talking about it in terms of some of the detailed stuff, some of the nuts and bolts in terms of duration, eligibility requirements, things like that. The question becomes, why do it? And the first one is small business development. And this is one that I kind of was alluding to earlier. The Mentor-Protege program really does offer a lot of opportunity for small businesses to gain hands-on and real-life experience from businesses who have been doing it longer and who have more experience doing federal contracting or just, you know, being in business in general. And so the mentor is responsible for providing the assistance items with the Mentor-Protege agreement. This is to say that whatever assistance items are enshrined in that Mentor-Protege agreement that's approved by the SBA, the mentor is going to be responsible for delivering those assistance items. So depending upon what it is that those assistance items are, you know, is it back of house? Is it assistance maybe developing safety and QC plans? Maybe it's gaining financial resources, bonding, things like that. They're responsible for providing those items, and with those items provided, they'll be in a place where the small business has really gained from the relationship. This is one that I see kind of get overlooked, which is why I kind of hammer it here. But it's a big part of the program and really part of the point of the program. The ones that are talked about more because they have larger implications within the realm of federal regulation are the affiliation exceptions. And as I mentioned, affiliation is a pretty broad topic. What it refers to is situations where businesses have relationships with one another, whether it be through common ownership, common management, maybe some subcontracting, where one firm is going to be deemed to have the ability to control the other so that there's no real clear delineation of where those two businesses start and stop. Under that situation, a situation where there's affiliation between the firms, the SBA is going to deem those two firms affiliated, and it's going to aggregate either the revenue of a revenue-based size standard firm or the employees. Either way, the place where affiliation goes is size eligibility. So remember that to be a mentor-protege, you have to have a small business protege. They have to be small. However, providing assistance items like financial assistance, subcontracting assistance, providing business leads, those are the types of things that can lead to affiliation. And so what the SBA's Mentor-Protege program does is it says, okay, if you're in an approved Mentor-Protege program, whatever assistance that you're providing within the terms of that Mentor-Protege program are not going to be on the table for finding affiliation between the firms. Now, this is a big deal, particularly when you think about large businesses providing mentorship to small business proteges. What that shields is a situation where, say, mom and pop's airplanes are going to be affiliated from Lockheed or with Lockheed Martin. And so that's kind of what this does. But the affiliation exceptions can also be used with smaller relationships to try and prevent the SBA from going, is there maybe some affiliation that's going on here? Because if you go through and you get the mentor-protege in place, you can start to then put into the agreement what assistance items those two businesses want to be providing to one another and provide some affiliation shields in the future if you think that's going to be a problem. The next one is really kind of the highlight of the program, and it's the thing that I think gets talked about the most. It's the Mentor-Protege joint venture. The way that this works is that a compliant mentor-protege agreement can form, or parties to a valid mentor-protege agreement can form a joint venture entity, and then they can bid on small business projects regardless of the mentor size. So because the protege always has to be small, the protege business is going to qualify for small businesses or for small business set-asides, but it might also qualify for SDVOSB, 8A, HubZone, WOSB. So you can have a lot of potential involvement in the small business pool. And if you have a mentor that's a large business, that mentor-protege joint venture can now have that big business providing assistance. It can be providing past performance experience. It can be providing resources at the joint venture level, but it's still going to be deemed a small business joint venture. And that's really kind of where I think a lot of people see the Mentor-Protege program as fitting, and why it is that the business development side sometimes gets lost, because the Mentor-Protege joint venture side is the ticket for larger businesses to get into the small business pools. And then the final one here is equity investments. A mentor can make a 40% equity investment to provide capital to grow the protege. Again, this is one that kind of ties into some of these affiliation ideas, because having larger and larger stakes in a company starts to raise questions about affiliation. Well, under the Mentor-Protege program, the mentor can make that investment into the protege firm without fear that that's going to then trigger an affiliation consideration. So that's kind of what some of the high level benefits are. Of course, specific circumstances can make some of these more or less appealing depending upon where you're at, but these are kind of the high level things that get talked about the most. Okay, so what types of assistance? I've been talking about assistance and I've been giving some examples as we talk through this, but there's about 6 kind of general items that the SBA identifies. Usually the way that you do it is you just try and find how it is that the specific assistance items that you would like fit into these general categories, because they're pretty broad. The first one is technical and management. So this is talking about, accounting, marketing, manufacturing, strategic planning, providing assistance growing the business and its technical capabilities and how it manages those technical capabilities. So it's a lot of the hands-on kind of performance related items. The next type of assistance is financial. So this can talk about, equity investments and loans. It can talk about, you could get into maybe some bonding support there. It's really kind of these financial items and things that go more to the financial resources available to the protege. The next one is subcontracting. So this can run either way. It can be the mentor to the protege, or it can be the protege to the mentor. And so, getting subcontracts in place between the business and providing experience and hands-on learning through the subcontracting process. So, you can kind of dovetail some of these as well. Maybe the technical and management assistance items can be provided through subcontracting experience. Instead of sitting down and saying, well, we're going to have a seminar with our protege, every third Friday, talk about various topics. It can be like, well, we're going to provide some of these technical management items, and through subcontracting opportunities, we'll be providing hands-on experience and things like that. Trade education, finding markets is another one. Being able to identify where it is that you fit, things like that can be assistance items. Business development and strategy more general. So strategy for partnerships, for mentor-protege agreements, or I'm sorry, not mentor-protege, for joint venture agreements, getting subcontractors lined up, identifying potential teaming partners and things like that. That can be business development items. Getting introduced to clients, identifying maybe new markets with new agencies that hadn't been previously tapped. All that stuff can kind of be business development. And then general administrative. So, human resources is a big one. Helping with HR payroll type stuff frequently is stuff that small businesses need help with, particularly if they're scaling quickly for federal contracts. And then helping with security clearances. Those can be very challenging for small businesses to get, particularly facility security clearances. And so the mentor might be able to help with some of that. So what's the agreement look like then? We're talking about a lot of these kind of specifics and what goes into it and what are the considerations. What's the agreement look like? Well, the agreement is largely dictated by the SBA. It's an SBA program. The SBA has put together the regulations for it, and they have kindly provided a template that you can use to put together a mentor-protege agreement. Though I will caution, having used it several times, it is not the most user-friendly to try and put together. But it's not here or there. The core agreement is really listing what the protege needs, how the mentor is going to provide assistance to meet those needs, what the timelines are for the mentor providing those assistance, and then how is it going to be measured. And those are really kind of the four key things. That whole agreement template is really structured to try and get that information to the SBA. So much so that the SBA just uses a table to communicate that. It's just got rows and columns, so it can just immediately see what this stuff is. And so, identifying needs is pretty easy. It's the protege probably has an idea of like, hey, here's where we could use some assistance. How it is that the mentor will provide assistance to meet those needs, again, is sort of self-evident, because it'll be like, well, we know that they need help with getting introduced to new clients. And we've got a book, so we'll introduce them to some of our leads or contacts. We'll do 3 a year, something like that. The timeline, and then more importantly, the metrics, is where I see things become a little bit more contentious from the SBA's review side. You want to put timelines in place that are attainable. You don't want to set yourself up for failure when it comes to how quickly are we going to be providing these assistance items or stuff like that. But you also don't want to languish so far that the SBA is like, are you ever really going to give this stuff or not? So there's sort of a Goldilocks point where you want it to be meaningful, but not necessarily needlessly aggressive. And then the metrics. The metrics are really the place where the SBA gets the most interested. These refer to how will the parties determine whether there has been success with the assistance. And about 2 to 3 years ago, I saw the SBA start to get a lot more interested in this specific question. It used to be pretty loosey-goosey with, if you've got some type of metric, good enough. And more recently, the SBA has wanted to kind of push mentors and proteges to really critically think about, how are we going to know whether this assistance got provided and whether that was adequate? So that's kind of started to come to the fore a bit more. Mentor-Protégé joint ventures. And this is one where I want to hit that first bullet hard. There is a key distinction between a mentor-protégé program or a mentor-protégé agreement and a joint venture agreement. They're different documents. They do different things. Being in an approved mentor-protégé relationship does not mean that you have a joint venture with that protégé. They're different things. So you're going to need two agreements to do it. First one is the mentor-protégé agreement. We talked about that. The joint venture is then going to be a joint venture that's going to have to comply with all of the same rules for the joint venture program that you're pursuing. So that might be the 8A program, SDVOSB, WOSB, HubZone, whatever it's going to be, or small business. It's going to need to comply with those regs. But it's also going to need to be structured to comply with the mentor-protégé requirements as well. And unfortunately, the SBA in one of its recent rule changes has really kind of gummed up the works in this regard. The the joint venture regulations were pretty consistent no matter which program you were using. There were 12 things, we're going to talk about them a bit later in this presentation, that your joint venture had to have. The SBA has recently changed the Mentor-Protégé regulations, and it's changed 2 of those items, but it's only changed them in the Mentor-Protégé context. It hasn't changed them in any of the other contexts. So you have to be careful about how it is that you draft some of these Mentor-Protégé program agreements to make sure that you're complying with both programs, because they have slightly different requirements. Frankly, it's kind of a trap for the unwary. I don't know why it is that the SBA did it that way, but it's what we have right now. So when it comes to establishing the Mentor-Protégé joint venture agreement, the joint venture is still going to have to abide by the work share requirements. So that's the protégé is going to have to perform 40% of the work performed by the joint venture. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the presentation too. So we'll go through some of the numbers and how that works. But then there's also going to be the applicable limitation on subcontracting. So that might be 50%, 75, 85, depending upon what industry you're in. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. But the joint venture is still going to be constrained by these items. It's not a free ticket. It's still regulated much in the way that joint ventures are. It's just that the mentor-protégé relationship allows bigger businesses in. And then the SBA must approve the mentor-protégé agreement. So the mentor-protégé agreement, not the joint venture agreement. The SBA must approve the mentor-protégé agreement before the joint venture can submit an offer for a federal government contract. And this is important because remember that the mentor-protégé agreement is something that provides affiliation exceptions. It provides shields against affiliation for the two businesses who are engaged in that particular relationship. If you submit bids with an anticipated mentor-protégé joint venture before the mentor-protégé agreement is in place, the SBA might find you affiliated. And if that mentor-protégé or if that mentor is a big business, that could pretty much torpedo a bid if it's a small business contract right there. So it's an important one. There's steps here. Mentor-protégé first, joint venture second. All right, so some of these important considerations. I've hit some of these, so I'll move through them kind of quickly. But for the protégé, the Mentor-Protégé program is a really good opportunity to learn from a seasoned company. It's an opportunity to see how someone who's been doing it a while is doing it and to learn from that. Now, the thing about it is that you need to ensure that whatever your mentor or whoever your mentor is actually going to be a good fit. You're getting into this potentially for 6 years. You want that business relationship to be a strong one. Also, as the protégé, you're limited to 2 mentors in your lifetime. So if you get a year in on that mentor-protégé and realize this actually ain't working very well for us, you've already burned up one of your mentors, and that pretty much means that, well, there go 5 years worth of eligibility opportunities that are just flushed down the drain with that. Good way to try and test the waters, proverbial contractor dating, if you will, get into a subcontract. See how it works. See if you work well with that company. It's a good opportunity. Yes, you may not be going for the biggest jobs right away, but you also are hedging your bets that if this doesn't go well, at least you're not going to be, totally lockstep with them for the next 5 years and butting heads. On the mentorship side, this is an opportunity to assess the mentor's own capabilities. I had a professor when I was in undergrad who told me he learned more about the subjects he taught in his first year of teaching than he did going through any of his undergraduate or PhD classes. As soon as you have to try and explain it to somebody else, and to do that clearly and consistently, you really do learn what it is that you know and what it is that you don't know. So for mentors, it's an opportunity to assess, what do they know? What don't they know? And to take that information and start figuring out how to build their capabilities. It's also a chance to make an investment in younger companies and say, hey, these people are going to be up and coming. We want to be there with them. This is an opportunity for us to support them. And then big and in bold, and I know I've said this a bunch, don't treat it as merely an avenue for joint venturing. There's so much more that the Mentor-Protege program can provide, that if you only go after it for the joint venturing opportunities, you're missing a lot of the value. Even though it doesn't seem that way, there's a lot of value that is buried in this program that the joint venture opportunities don't fully recover. Okay, so we've been talking about it. Let's move into the joint ventures. First things first, according to the SBA, a joint venture is a separate legal entity of limited purpose and duration. Now, that's a definition only a lawyer can love because it's loaded. So let's break it down. Let's go through the core steps. First, separate legal entity. This means that the joint venture is going to be an independent business. You're going to have to set up a new business. It's going to have a new taxpayer identification number, a new EIN. It's going to have new DUNS. It's going to have all of those items. It's also going to have the new magic corporate words behind it: Corp, LLC, LLP, whatever it is. It's going to be independent of either of the two businesses. The founding members, however, are going to be the members/owners of that separate legal entity. And I've got a chart on the next slide. So once we get there, we'll kind of show you visually how it looks. But that's the thing. It's separate. It has no relationship other than the ownership interests of the two parties that are involved. Next, limited purpose. Limited purpose means that the SBA expects that the joint venture is going to be limited to pursuing specific federal contracting opportunities. This is going to be, specific procurements, and that's usually the way that it works. Usually it's, identify the procurement you want to go for and name it expressly. Now, what happens with some frequency is that joint ventures will get set up, and then people will make amendments or addendums to them to keep using the joint venture entity that they established to bid on additional work. It happens. It's not a problem. It's just that then the purpose becomes to bid for a limited duration, specifically on federal contracting work. And the more narrowly you can define and tailor what that work looks like, the better off you are. And then limited duration. Really what the SBA is communicating here is that they don't want this mentor or this joint venture to be an ongoing legal entity. It's going to be something where you're going to bid for the work, you're going to hopefully win it, and then you're going to perform it, and then you're going to be done. Everyone's going to wipe their hands, and then the joint venture is going to terminate. So if you're looking at setting something up that's going to have, maybe 10, 15, 20-year horizons under the context of a joint venture, you're in the wrong program. That's not what it's built for. And more importantly, the SBA's rules on duration are pretty strict. And we'll get into that a little bit later, but there's a limited window that you can bid once a joint venture gets an award. So the SBA takes that very seriously. As I mentioned, here's the graphic for what I was talking about. So we've got ABC LLC and we've got 123 Corp. And setting aside the mentor-protege considerations and just thinking about it from just a standard joint venture, basic joint venture type of deal. Someone's going to have to be the managing venturer and someone's going to have to be the non-managing venturer. The managing venturer is typically going to have whatever socioeconomic set-aside designation that particular joint venture needs. So it's going to be the 8A firm, SDVOSB, HUBZone, WOSB. The non-managing venturer, unless you're a mentor-protege, is going to be another small business or a small business that does not share that same socioeconomic set aside. They're going to then form a third entity, which is very cleverly named ABC 123 LLC. That's going to be the joint venture entity. It is a separate legal entity. And then it is that separate legal entity, the ABC 123 LLC, that has the contractual relationship with the government. Now, again, this is a little bit of a legal fiction, because when you think about it, well, there's really no one in ABC 123 LLC. It's really just kind of a shell. Yes, the people who are going to be dealing on the ground are going to be the individuals who are from ABC LLC and 123 Corp. But this legal fiction is what the joint venture regulations require, and this is the ticket to doing joint venturing with the federal government. So that's just kind of the way that it works. So what's the point? The word is collaboration. I mean, a joint venture allows two small businesses or a large business mentor to work together to pursue federal jobs that would otherwise been out of reach. The goal is diversify capabilities and allow businesses to collaborate at a prime contract level to provide complementary capabilities. Now, this is usually practical support. So the joint venture structure allows businesses to pool resources. This could be equipment, this could be staffing resources, it could be any number of things. It allows them to diversify offerings. I can't do something on my own, but boy, if I team up with Matt, well, the two of us might be in business. It also allows them to take on larger projects, things that would otherwise have been out of reach. A joint venture has greater resources to draw on to be able to compete for that. It can avoid possible affiliation. Joint venture relationship provides some of its own affiliation shields. It can also leverage security clearances. This is a new item that has kind of come up. The SBA has provided clarification with respect to security clearances of the various members of a joint venture. It depends on who in the joint venture is going to be performing what work and who needs to be supplying that. But it used to be that there was this kind of, just uncertainty as to, did the joint venture entity need the security clearance? Did both of the members need it, or did only one need it? And the SBA has clarified that, well, depending on the circumstances, any one of those three options could work. It just depends on what the bid is. And then it finally allows a sharing of past performance. So if you've got a business, large or small, who has a lot of past performance experience, and you team with them in a joint venture capability, you can leverage that experience to really bolster that joint venture's opportunities for award. Also, I just heard the third grade class walk in. So if you hear some noise, that's what it is. So why are joint ventures helpful? Well, they preserve the small business status. And this really goes to that affiliation idea. A compliant joint venture is going to receive an exception from affiliation. So there's really kind of two types of small business joint ventures, and that's going to be either your mentor-protege or it's going to be two small businesses are involved. That's going to be it. What this exception is going to do is it's going to say, okay, for people who are involved in a valid mentor-protege, who are involved in a valid joint venture agreement, their participation in that joint venture is not going to result in a situation where they can't bid or where they're affiliated with one another. It's going to be something where if you're in a compliant joint venture, you're not going to be jeopardizing your size status for a procurement. This exception only lasts 2 years, however, and this is what I was alluding to with respect to limited duration. Once a joint venture receives a contract, it may submit additional offers for a period of 2 years from the date of the first award. That's it. After that, it could result in affiliation of the joint venture members, and so it could actually undermine your ability to win future work and could have much larger consequences even for individual work that you're bidding on. Because if you're affiliated with your joint venture member, that could be a general affiliation item. So what's the solution? And this is where, again, this is kind of a trap for the unwary. Just start a new joint venture. There's no prohibition on it. Just start a new joint venture with the same members. Keep on bidding. And then just make sure you always keep track of when it is that first award was made. And at the point in time at which that second award or that 2 years lapses, no more bids go in. Boom, start a new joint venture, keep rolling. Also, it provides an alternative to subcontracting. That's really the other thing. When clients come and ask, like, hey, we want to work on a project, and they ask, how should we do it? The answers are either subcontracting or joint venture. That's really the two main collaboration ideas. So the good news about joint ventures is that it allows you to be at the prime contract level. Like I said, it's like it showed up on the slide like I wrote it. All right, perfect. So past performance, how are you greater than the sum of your parts when it comes to a joint venture? First is past performance. Well, the SBA's regulations require the agency to consider the past performance of the joint venture and its members as a part of the evaluation. So it's not just the joint venture entity's experience, it's also those individual members who are going to be important. Also, small businesses can now rely on the performance as a JV member to some extent. So if you've performed on a joint venture and you're a small business and you go over for another procurement, you can say, hey, I actually worked on something that was pretty big as a joint venture member, and I've got experience from that that's relevant, and you can supply that as well. The next kind of helpful item is the equipment, personnel, and facilities. So joint ventures can pool equipment, personnel, and facilities and allows them to pursue larger work. The final one here is the facility security clearances. The SBA regulations allow either the joint ventures clearance or an individual member's clearance to satisfy the requirements. There was about 4 years where we dealt with a lot of protest items over clearance issues for small businesses and small business joint ventures. I am very thankful that the SBA got the message, and now there's at least guidance there. So that's a new change. If that's news, that's why. It's recent. Okay, drawbacks and pitfalls. First one, timing. Joint venture agreements, oftentimes attorneys will get involved and we always seem to slow things down. I'm sorry. Don't wait. There's a lot of paperwork to it. EIN, taxpayer identification, depending upon what it is, DUNS, SAM registration. All of these things need to be in place before bidding. And I'm sure that anyone who's dealt with those processes absolutely loves spending an afternoon trying to make that go. Wink, wink. Additionally, a non-compliant joint venture agreement is very susceptible to being attacked. And if it isn't compliant, you no longer have the benefits of the affiliation exception. And so it could very quickly torpedo a successful contract award to not have that paperwork in order. To this point, the SBA's regulations have detailed requirements. And if the joint venture agreement doesn't comply, it does not get the benefit of the size and affiliation exceptions. And then there's also the performance requirements. As a joint venture, you're going to have to meet those performance requirements. You're going to have to see those through. Those are two things. And so let's get into the performance requirements. The first is limitation on subcontracting. It applies to virtually every small business set-aside contract. I hope that several of you have dealt with this before. It limits the amount of a project that may be subcontracted, and it's measured as a percentage of the total dollars paid by the government. Now, there's different amounts for different industries. 50% is the threshold for services and supplies. 75 is specialty trades, so like HVAC and elevator repair, and then 85% is general construction. So, you're looking at how much of that total contract value you can subcontract. So it's 50, 75, or 85. Then for joint ventures, there's a second requirement. It's the performance work requirement. This only applies to small business joint ventures. And what it says is that the managing venturer must perform at least 40% of the work performed by the joint venture. So how does that look? Cue the handy pie graph. Yes. All right, perfect. So I said that and I was really hoping that was the slide that was going to show up. So here's how this works graphically. If you've got a joint venture and that joint venture is performing let's just say it's a services contract. So you're looking at a 50% limitation on subcontracting. If you want to cut this as finely as possible, here's the way to do it. You can subcontract up to 50% of the work that the joint venture does. That's the limitation on subcontracting requirement. From there, the performance work requirement is between the partner joint venture and the managing venturer. So for that remaining 50% that hasn't been subcontracted, the managing venturer must perform 40%. What does that look like in terms of total performance, however? Well, really what that means is the managing venture only needs to perform 20% of the work performed by the joint venture on the total job. From a total job perspective, you're looking at 20% is the minimum if you're using a 50% limitation on subcontracting, and you cut it as finely as possible. Now, I don't recommend cutting it this finely. It leaves zero room for error, and if there's instances where there's inconsistencies or something needs to change, there's performance changes, which we all know happen, it leaves very little wiggle room. But if you want to get as fine as possible, that's the way that it works. So joint venture agreements, get them in writing. All joint ventures have to be written. And then the agreement also needs to be executed by each of the parties. Make sure they actually sign it. It seems like something that's pretty straightforward, but you'd be amazed sometimes. Get the signatures. And then there's different regulations. They have almost the same requirements, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but to qualify as an 8A, SDVOSB, WOSB, a hub zone, or a Mentor-Protege joint venture, there's specific requirements dictated by the SBA. The regulations for 8A, SDVOSB, WOSB, hub zone are largely identical. It's the Mentor-Protege where there's slight differences. These include requiring financial statements as opposed to performance of work statements. It's sort of a pedantic change, but it's enough to be a problem sometimes. So I think that the next slide has some of just the general requirements. Yeah, I'm going to breeze through some of these. If you really want to get into the details of what the agreement needs, it might be something that makes sense for us to chat or to chat with another government contract attorney or PTAC. But whoever the socioeconomic entity is, they need to own 51%. They need to supply the managing venturer who's going to be responsible for the day-to-day management and administration. And they're also going to have the ability, and this is a recent change, the minority party is going to be able to participate in decisions as is commercially customary. We're not really sure what that means yet, but there's at least a little bit more opportunity for the minority investors to have a little bit more involvement, but really it's that managing venture that needs to run the show. Managing venture is going to need to supply a responsible manager who's going to have responsibility for overseeing the contract's performance. They need to be a employee of the managing venture. Now, they can be someone who's going to have a letter of commitment. That's okay. They can get hired contingently, but they need to be an employee to perform the work. And if you're in a mentor-protege agreement, they cannot be a former employee of the mentor. And then the venturer must receive profits commensurate with the work performed, or you can have a higher percentage if it's agreed to by the parties, but usually it's commensurate with the work performed. So however much you did. Then you're going to need to state what the purpose is. It's designed to go and get federal contracts. You're going to have bank account information. It's going to say, hey, who's going to be required to sign checks, who's going to be able to make deposits, things like that. You're going to have to itemize the major equipment, facilities, and resources that are going to be provided by both the members. You're going to need to provide the responsibilities of the parties for negotiation, for supplying labor, for contract performance. You're also going to have a clause that obligates all of the members to perform, even if one withdraws. And then there's a whole bunch of records compliance. You have to say where you're going to keep them. It needs to be at the managing venturer's office. There has to be retention of final records by the managing venturer. There's quarterly financial statements that need to be made to the SBA. There's project profit and loss statements, and then there has to be a certification of compliance. It has to be compliant for each bid, and this includes any addendums. I mentioned earlier that some people use a joint venture agreement to bid on several jobs. The addendums are part of that agreement, and if they're identifying specific work tasks for a new project, they have to be in there because otherwise the joint venture doesn't cover that project. So don't forget it and make sure you sign it. And then 8A joint ventures are unique. For sole source awards, they need to be approved by the SBA before award. They need to show that the 8A lacks the necessary capacity to perform, which I think is kind of rude. And then the agreement must be fair and equitable. And then there will be a denial if the 8A brings little to the table other than its 8A status. And then any amendments need to be approved also. However, and this is a change, approval for 8A joint ventures is no longer required for competitive awards, but eligibility will still be determined at the time of award. All right, prime sub teams, we're getting to the end here. So I'm going to kind of wrap through it so that we can get to a little bit of question and answer if we need it here. So this is kind of the quintessential contracting relationship. You've got a prime contractor who is awarded the contract, and then it subcontracts a portion of that out to one or more subcontractors. The prime contractor is the only contractor that has what's called privity of contract with the government. This is to say that they're the ones who are responsible or liable for performance of the contract to Uncle Sam. The subcontractors do not have that same privity of contract. This still goes even if you're in a prime sub team. The only way that you get that kind of mutual privity of contract is if you go the joint venture route. Prime sub teams are ultimately governed by whatever their teaming agreements are and whatever the subcontracts are. There's no real Uncle Sam involvement there. So let's look at a structural comparison here. For prime contractor, subcontractor, there's only prime in the privity with the government. I just talked about that. There's no new legal entity created. Nothing's happening with new entities. Subcontractor is paid on a predetermined basis in the subcontract, and there's limitation on subcontract considerations. For mentor-protege joint ventures or just joint ventures generally, you're setting up a new legal entity, all right? There's gonna be split ownership there. Only the joint venture entity is gonna have that privity with the government, though functionally because the members are going to be the ones who are really doing the work, they're the ones who have kind of this co-prime situation going on. Ventures split profit and losses in accordance with the joint venture agreement. And then there's both the work share and the limitation on subcontracting considerations. So a teaming agreement, this is kind of where things start. The agreement is between the prospective prime and the prospective subcontractor to pursue a specific opportunity. They're entered before the prime contract and subcontracts are awarded. It's really kind of a precursor to everything when you're bidding. They in theory, lock each party into the relationship. Though I will say that from a legal standpoint, teaming agreements, despite being anticipated by the FAR and the federal government, have encountered some resistance in federal courts when it comes to enforcement opportunities. So their legal status is a little bit dubious. Regardless, there's something that the federal contracting world accepts and acknowledges, and so they still happen. It's kind of this weird duality that happens. Regardless, their idea is to try and tie people to a particular program and contracting relationship. They're going to define the roles of the team and their work in developing a proposal. And then they're going to kind of ensure compliance with requirements from the outset. Now, the FAR does acknowledge teaming agreements, but it doesn't specifically require them. However, some specific solicitation terms might. And then there can be possible enforcement challenges, which I mentioned, depending upon where you're trying to enforce it. So teaming agreement, potential terms, you want to identify the parties and their roles, who's doing what, identify the solicitation opportunity being pursued. You want to let people know what are we being bound to and for which job. You want to divide up the responsibilities relating to proposal preparation. You want to identify anticipated areas of performance under the contract. And you want to do this to avoid kind of illusory items like, we're generally going to do what the PWS requires. That's going to potentially be an enforcement problem. What's much better is to say, hey, company A is going to be responsible for PWS items 1 through 4. Company B is going to be responsible for number 5 through 9. That's a much stronger way to structure it. Potential exclusivity, non-disclosure, and termination provisions. Identify what are we going to be able to talk about with other people here, and then maybe put some key subcontract provisions in there. Say, hey, we're gonna comply with the limitation on subcontracting regardless. We're gonna make sure that everyone's above board with OCI and ethics, and then there's gonna be some FAR flow downs that everyone's gonna be bound by. And then subcontracts. These are awarded by the prime contractor to the subcontractor after a contract award. So they can be negotiated in advance, though frequently I don't see that happen. And they replace or supersede the teaming agreement. Basically, if you win, teaming agreement goes away, subcontract takes its place. Detailed provisions relate to subcontractor performance. So what's the scope of work? What are they going to be doing? What deliverables and performance benchmarks are in place? And what are the payment provisions? And then common subcontract provisions also include FAR flow downs, ethics limitations, limitation on subcontracting compliance, non-disclosure, non-compete, non-solicitation of employees terms are frequent. Depending upon what you're doing, Service Contract Act compliance might be an item. Changes is a big one. What are we going to do if the government makes a change? Who's responsible for what? How are we going to make claims? Dispute resolution, another very important one to have in there. How are we going to work through problems? And then termination. If the contract gets terminated for convenience, how do we handle that? If it's for default, how do we handle that? Or if we need to do it between each other, how does that work as well? All right, takeaways. Here we go. And then I got 15 minutes for questions. Cool. Mentor-Protege program, it offers significant benefits. Small businesses can receive a significant mentoring, and they can get that mentorship from an established business. It also offers affiliation protection. The joint venturing possibilities include, capital raising. They include a whole bunch of assistance items. It can really be an accelerator for small businesses. Joint ventures are a powerful tool as well. They allow two small businesses or a mentor and its protege to collaborate to target bigger projects. That's a big deal. They also provide some affiliation exceptions and limitation on subcontracting advantages. However, you have to have a compliant agreement, and it has to be compliant for each bid opportunity. Just saying, hey, we've got a mentor-protege or a joint venture agreement, we put it together 3 bids ago, probably means you're non-compliant. That's a document that you want to be sure you're refreshing each time you're looking to use it on a new bid. And then prime subcontractor teams. This is one of the kind of most quintessential structures for federal contracting. It basically, you've got a prime who's doing business with the government, then they subcontract some of that work. You're still going to be bound by limitation on subcontracting for small business work, but it provides perhaps a more customizable solution for each procurement. You might be able to work out some specific terms that wouldn't be possible under the more rigid more mentor-protege or joint venture structures. All right, there we go.
Fantastic work. There's so much information. I love how it's laid out in this slide deck. And just let everyone know, I will provide the slide deck after this. It's just, there's just a great deal of information that it can be really confusing. I mean, for myself, I've gone through these trainings over and over, and every time questions come up, say, am I understanding this correctly? So perfect. Thank you so much, Ian. We're going to open it up for some questions from our guests attendees today. If you would like to unmute and ask Ian directly about some experience or question or confusion you may have, let's open that up. Who'd like to ask a question or share their information?
Hey, Ian, this is Dave McCormick. Great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave.
A hard lesson that's been learned locally is the importance for the subcontractor, the teaming subcontractor, to also read the RFP that the prime contractor is responding to. With the HMIS award here locally for the mission support contractor, turns out it was clearly indicated in the prime contract instructions to offerers that there was no accommodation for teaming subs in general. There was an accommodation for critical subcontractors subject to specific criteria, but teaming subs would not be evaluated as part of the proposal.
Okay.
And there were perhaps a dozen teaming subcontractors that all contributed, submitted information. They were not named in the proposal. Section L specifically said, don't provide us anything because we're not going to evaluate it. And yet they anticipated being teaming subcontractors following award, and that didn't happen. And I think the lesson was, subcontractor, read the prime RFP for yourself and reach your own conclusions.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, to follow up on that one, that's an interesting example of where it is that specific solicitations can modify some of these rules. And I've seen it happen with other procurements as well. I'm trying to think back. I think CIO SP4 had some weird stuff in it as well for stuff like that. For anyone who followed that procurement, there was some weird, when can you rely on experience of someone? And so, yeah, the specific solicitations can very thoroughly modify what some of these rules are and what some of the expectations are. Another thing to keep in mind too is that even from a subcontractor level, though I've never really seen this happen, you know, there's always the opportunity to protest the terms of a solicitation and to challenge those terms and say, hey, they're unreasonable. This doesn't make sense. And for something like a teaming arrangement, you know, particularly if you're saying, hey, we're not going to consider that information, that might be one that maybe would be unduly restrictive. I don't know. I'm kind of just riffing on what it is I'd even think to look for. But yeah, I mean, it's disappointing, but it's something that can happen. But it is a good kind of lesson to keep in mind of, yeah, you want to get the solicitation. That's why having that solicitation number in that teaming agreement is important. Go and look it up.
Thank you.
So Dave, did any of those mention that they did not have access to that information to review it on their own? Was that part of the communication challenge, or could they actually see the RFP and read it for themselves for clarification?
It was all available. It's posted on the acquisition website and, you know, available for everyone to read. There were actually numerous clues that that most people missed. There was a disallowance of it in the instructions, and nobody noticed that they didn't show up in the proposal. Their experience was not submitted and evaluated. The pricing was not submitted or evaluated, and their names didn't show up. Only the critical subcontractor showed up in the proposal, and therefore that was the only one that survived and was part of the award. Yeah, it's a very sad circumstance. Small businesses locally spent a lot of money to participate in that procurement. I'm having a dog fight, sorry.
Been there.
That's kind of representative of what happened in our community when that happened too.
Yeah,
Dog
for
fight
sure.
of its own. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
You know, that kind of takes me to one of the points I'd made earlier in the presentation as well of before getting into a mentor-protege relationship, try subcontracting. Because it sounds like this was a pretty rude awakening for some people that, hey, this is probably going to be sort of predatory if we got into that type of relationship. So,
Yeah,
you know, it's another way that subcontracting can support the mentor-protege program and potentially get you out of some jams.
sure. Yeah, you mentioned how important it is for the parties to have a good working relationship. It needs to be based on mutual trust, but at the end of the day, it's always trust but verify.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very good point. Thank you, Dave. Kathy or Aaron, anybody have something you'd like to share today or questions for Ian?
I do have a question. This is Kathy Miller. It's with regards to mentor-protege arrangements. Does the DOE program count towards the limit of 2 under the All Small Mentor-Protege program?
So the DOE is going to be administered by DOE. It's not actually a small or an SBA program. So I don't believe so. It's a good question. You know, it's one where usually what the SBA is talking about is its mentor-protege programs. And I know that a lot of the agency-specific programs are starting to fall by the wayside. And so I don't know exactly how they view DOE. And to be frank, I don't know that they've actually answered that question, which seems kind of surprising. The number of times as an attorney that I realize there isn't a direct answer to a question kind of amazes me sometimes, but I'm not certain. I don't believe so. I believe that what they're talking about is approved SBA mentor-protege agreements is what they're talking about with too.
That's always been our interpretation, but I wanted to hear it from someone else.
Yeah.
I will say, if you've noticed in some of the exhibits that you complete for some of the proposals, for some of the primes, they will ask that question if you are in already a mentor-protege agreement. That is a question that has been added on some of the exhibits of late for some of the prime contracts with the proposals that are coming out.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Just to add on that on her question, something that when I researched the mentorship program, like understanding the SBA has their own, the DOE does have their own, the DOD has their own, and they have their own requirements. Like one basic one was for example, DoD mentorship programs, you need to have been in business for at least minimum of 2 years to even be eligible, you know. Those are just like the small details of it. But to answer her question, I would answer like, yes, there is actually different requirements for each organization and their requirements of their version, I would say, of the mentorship program, because that's pretty much what I got out of it. Understand?
Yeah.
So that's why I would pursue, let's say, an SBA mentorship program over, you know, DOE or DOD as of right now. So that's my little input on it.
Yeah, I will say that the SBA program has the advantage of providing a lot of the affiliation exceptions and things like that, things that the agency specific ones can't necessarily provide because they're not SBA directed. And so, you know, there's what I have found, and that 2-year point that you bring up is actually interesting, because I think it's a callback to the fact that the Mentor-Protege program used to be only 8A, and in order to be 8A, you have to have 2 years worth of business. And so I think that it's sort of the DoD borrowing some of the concepts from the SBA when it put the regs together, but now because the SBA has changed course, some of that is now outdated, and it doesn't all jive together. So I think that might be some of what's going on as well. What I have seen is that the move is towards the SBA's programs. A lot of the agency level programs are starting to get either less love, or they're just kind of starting to just wind down. But I've also found that the SBA's programs provide some of the biggest advantages, because the SBA is the agency that can provide the affiliation and those types of exceptions. So, but it's a great point.
Wonderful answer. Perfect.
It's a really good question. I sort of wonder, just as an outsider to this, maybe back to Kathy or Aaron, if you, you know, if you're wondering about the DOE versus the SBA version, have any of you contacted the CO directly of a specific opportunity and asked them if the DOE MP would count against, you know, as one against the total allowed under SBA? Has anyone had a direct answer from a CO or their manager to clarify that for you here?
I have not, no, I haven't, because we don't have a mentor-protege agreement, but when I worked for Lucas, we were under one with CPC Co. But I do know that occasionally when we were doing proposals for other primes, that would come up on, that would be an exhibit question asking if we were currently in a mentor-protege agreement. So, and I will, to reiterate what Bernard said, I do notice that the DOE also does have a lot of that 2-year requirement. With my new company, I know that was a pickle for us when we were pursuing a proposal with the prime. And so we have 2 entities under my company, so we had to switch over to the other entity because the one entity did not fulfill that 2-year requirement, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I will say on that, I don't know that the contracting officer would be the one to know either, largely because it's an SBA rule. And so, you know, the CO probably is going to be like, I don't know, you have to talk to the SBA on that one. I'm just not aware of it. It might be buried in some of the regulatory guidance, but it's my understanding that when it comes to these programs, the SBA is administering its program, and it doesn't have the authority to, well, I guess it depends on who you ask, you know, whether the SBA has authority to be able to try and reach out and kind of start counting some of these other programs. I just don't know. I don't think that it would. I mean, I think that really what it's trying to police is to make sure that someone isn't getting into the SBA's Mentor-Protege with its unique advantages for more than the standard allotted time. But you know, it's a great question. It's one. I will say that up where you guys are, it's a unique one, because pretty much there's pockets where some of the agency specific Mentor-Protege programs are still kind of hot and heavy. But by and large, I don't see them happen with any degree of frequency anymore from just kind of the general across the board, kind of larger contracting sphere. I mean, it's pretty uncommon to have that come up. I'll get a question every couple of months on them, but they're not nearly as frequent as they once were.
Thank
From
you.
what I've researched when looking into it, I do want to say that they do regard each one separately. So like each you had 2 DOE. I truly believe, but I'm not going to say it's absolutely correct. But from what I was researching, yeah, DOD will not count your DOE mentorship programs against you. So
Right.
I that from what I at least understood, like looking
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
But other than that, Ian, I want to say, man, that it was a wonderful presentation. This was perfect. It really opened my eyes to, like, here I thought joint ventures were almost the same thing as teaming and this and that, but wow, like they're not, you know, and
Yep.
being able to learn each one and use it as a tool for your company, because essentially like that is how you're going to be able to move forward or grow. Wonderful. This is one of the best presentations in a while. So I really
Great. I
appreciate
am pleased.
it. Yes.
Thank you for sharing that, Bernald. And I hope that everybody learned something new today. I know I do anytime that I am participating or hosting in any event like this. Doesn't matter how much reading I do or research, homework, there's always something new. And like Ian mentioned, there are recent changes to the SBA rules. You know, 8 hours from now, we might find there's yet another change. There's constant transition. And this is just a perfect example of why I think it's very important to bring a law firm here to our PTAC workshops, because they are seeing from backstage a little bit what's happening, what's coming, and taking the initiative to try to, you know, put this information into people terms, not just jargon that we don't understand. And I think this is a fine time to be reviewing this with all the changes coming up, continuing changes with the new administration, and all of it is applicable to our small businesses and large businesses throughout our state. So greatly appreciate having Ian here to share his knowledge, his expertise with us, and really appreciate everybody having time and taking the time away from your busy days to come to share this experience with us.